the trade group for the Concrete Foundation Association is going to be writing angry letters to the podcast saying that,
can we write them angry letters
long-term...
about where can we buy your product? Because no one will sell us your product right now.
Welcome to the Fine Homebuilding Podcast, our weekly discussion of building, remodeling, and design topics aimed at anybody who cares deeply about the craft and science of working on houses. This is Senior Editor Patrick McComb. Today I'm joined by Green Building Advisor Senior Editor Kylie Jacques.
Hello, everybody.
Production Manager for TDS Custom Construction, Ian Schwant.
Hello, everybody.
And our producer, Jeff Rose.
Hi there.
Please email your questions to fhbpodcast@taunton.com. You can find previous podcasts and check out the show notes at finehomebuilding.com/podcast. Ian, it's been so long since you've been on the show. I think I got your title wrong. Is it?
No, you got it. You got it.
Did I get it right?
You got it. Yeah.
All right.
It felt weird not starting the show, not driving the bus today. It felt strange.
It's a delight to have you here. It's been too long, but you've had plenty to do hosting the Pro Talks quite regularly, and you're doing a fine job. Thank you for doing that.
Yeah, thanks for the opportunity to do it. I definitely miss being on with all of you on the big show. I feel like I'm off on the side stage talking to other builders. So
arguably, it's more interesting to some listeners.
At least more useful.
Yeah.
Have you enjoyed it, or is it a lot of work? It's probably
both.
A
lot of work, but I've enjoyed it. I've gotten to talk to some people that I had previous relationships with. I think right about the time where this one comes out, my interview with Luke DeBlasi of DeBlasi Painting, who's a young guy that I've known for probably a decade, who now runs a very large, very successful painting company with almost all of the members of his immediate family.
Cool.
Work for him, and we had a really fun talk about how that company grew from just his dad doing high-end paint work to now, him and his brother, a couple cousins, a sister, just grew from one guy doing work.
I really admire painting companies when they're done well, because it is really difficult work that gets not a lot of recognition for how difficult it is. And if you can build a family business out of that, I mean, kudos to you. That's fantastic. It's the kind of work that not a lot of people want to do, I mean, it's very draining on the body, painting. It's tough.
Yeah, at the end of the episode, Luke goes through the steps that they take to train new employees, because as they've grown, they've had to take on people from outside the family, so to speak. But he talks through the steps that they go through training everybody to do the site protection, do the prep work, and then actually use the fancy coatings that they use.
Do they have like an extension ladder obstacle course where you have to carry an upright extension ladder through, hedges and up steps and around trash cans and around small children and pets?
Knowing Luke's dad, Mike, as well as I do, I wouldn't be shocked if they've got something like that.
What amazes me is painters are so freaking strong. Like, people who carry around a 40-foot extension ladder by themselves, that blows my mind.
Do you know what gets me about painting is, having your arms above your head for hours and hours and hours and hours.
And looking
I know
back,
what that feels like. And
constantly.
Your head. I mean, it's one of those jobs where, and so much of construction and related trades are, it's like, I think unless you do that type of work in some capacity or another, you don't necessarily appreciate how tough it is on your body. It's not easy work.
Amen. So what's your going on at Homestead, Ian? We haven't had a chance to talk about that either.
Yeah, not a ton. Winter hit, so we've kind of stopped on the shed. It's as far as it's gotten, and we're okay with that. There's no big push to get it done. So Sarah and I started doing some interior work. I did some fit up for the closet because I just done the shells of where we hang our clothes, but none of the drawers and pull-outs for the closet. So we did a bunch of those. Going to put together a growing room for her. And then I I ordered all of my finished
Wait a
stair
minute.
parts.
Yeah, right. What's a growing room? Yeah,
What are
I'm
we
like, oh,
growing?
what's that? I want one of those. I don't even know what it is, and I want one.
So it's a room where she can have her UV lights to start plants so that they can go out into the greenhouse.
Okay.
Probably in early March, late February if it's warm enough, and then we can get them in the garden earlier.
Cool.
But to do that, that room is going to go underneath the stairs. So I had to order all of my stair parts and take down my Andy Engel Memorial plywood balustrade.
Oh.
So
you're trimming this out to be finished, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
So I finally ordered all the parts for it and kind of conceptualized what it's going to look like. So looking forward to getting all of that stuff and doing that project.
How big of a
Given
space is
the
it?
price increases in materials in the last few years, I'm guessing stair parts are one of the things that have gotten more expensive. Is that true?
Yeah, it was painfully expensive to buy all the parts for it. Yeah, that was like one night of spending $3,000 on parts.
Wow. Oh man, it blows my mind how expensive that stuff is. And I'm guessing you didn't go super fancy based on that bill.
No, I'm just going to do red oak treads, but I did have to have them custom made because I built the stairs to the commercial 6-inch rise, 12-inch depth. So I had to get them, wider. And then also I think I had to order them at 60 inches in length, which the most I could get anywhere was 54. And then the ones coming down the stairs from the main floor to the landing will have the returned edge on them. And then I found a cool handrail with kind of a really simple, they call it a candlestick newel post, and then matching spindles. And I'm going to do an over-the-top handrail with all of the curved fittings.
Sounds over the top.
Ian, am I right to think that you just said that the growing room is going to go beneath that staircase? Is that what you're doing? So how big of a space will that be? So it's going
to be about 5 feet wide, and then it's going to be the area under the stairs plus the adjacent hallway. So it's going to be about 12-ish feet total to the usable space under the stairs.
I can't imagine very many people are using that portion of their space for that reason. I think that's neat.
Yeah, it was just the idea of like, where do we put all of this stuff? We don't have a great space for it, and this is just a hallway that's not really utilized. We had some bookshelves in it, and then we just moved those to some other place where they made more sense in the house.
Mm-hmm.
Is Sarah done seed starting for veggie gardening in years past? Yeah, so
she has. Yeah, she didn't do it the year that we built the house because obviously we were a little preoccupied. But she wants to get it going again.
Yeah.
Well, it's nice to have you on the show, and thanks for being here.
Agreed.
What are you up to, Kylie?
Well, we've had a series of, I'm on a slightly more northern climate now, so we've had a series of weather events, snow and ice, and the damage it's wreaked on my parents' landscape has been astronomical. So I've been hauling brush and missing my tools, and so stewarding the landscape. I've got a beautiful magnolia that was planted for my parents' 15th wedding anniversary, however many years ago that was, and it was 3 feet tall, and it is now 25 to 30 feet tall and just as wide, and it has suffered. So this weekend I plan to do some pole pruning. It turns out my folks have a really nice pole pruner, so I'm excited to get out there and steward the land. That's my objective these days.
That's cool. And that's super awesome. You can help them out because I'm guessing that's not something they're going to be able to do, right?
They can't. Yeah, they're older. So it's so nice to feel useful. I love that.
Oh my gosh. And I bet it's awesome for your parents.
Yeah. I think they get a kick out of seeing me do it too, give them something to watch.
That's cool. Do you have anything to report, Jeff? How did your house come through the ice storm we had?
We really didn't get much in the way of anything, just lots of rain.
Mm-hmm.
One thing after last week's after show, we were talking about tool storage. You mentioned that your wife uses the Milwaukee pack out for her work. Do you want to tell folks a little bit about that? Because I found it very interesting.
Well, I mean, she's a set designer and set decorator, and so she needs to have whatever is needed. So she has a lot of very diverse stuff, and she's got that thing packed full, and when it's all stacked together, it's taller than she is, but it's
cool.
She knows where everything is, and it's easy to get to. And
does Robin have? Is it tools or is it props for sets?
It's tools. It's like art supplies. It's cleaning supplies. Lots of cleaning supplies. Like stuff there's so much specialized knowledge that you have when you're doing sets. It's like, all right, she's got paint rollers for velvet fabric.
For what?
For velvet fabric. That's how you smooth out velvet fabric. How you get labels off things.
That's so cool, Jeff. I was a stagehand in college for 4 years, so I can value what that skill set requires.
Yeah. You would have loved having these storage, stackable storage boxes when you were doing that work, Kylie, I guarantee.
Neat. That's really neat.
Well, I have nothing to report. Ian, you probably don't know it, but I've got a library ladder with a bunch of tool storage behind me now. But
have you been
I want
using
more
it?
folks who listen to the show talking about that. What's that, Kylie?
Have you been using it? Has it been sliding across your floor?
I've been filling
functional?
it, which is the fun part. I've been moving the stuff that's been in the basement up onto my shelves behind me.
Oh, I got you. Okay. Oh, yeah.
And sorting some stuff and getting rid of some stuff in the same process. So
I see your
it's been enjoyable.
reorganization.
Anyone who knows me would agree that I like order and creating order out of my chaos.
Yes.
Well, am I going to get a
chaos.
tour? Am I going to get a tour of the barn in late February when I'm in town?
Oh yeah, and I hope you'll climb the library ladder and retrieve something that you wouldn't otherwise be able to. Yeah.
Are you going to put the anvil up on the top shelf now? Or?
It's hilarious, Jeff. I thought about that. I was like, if it makes sense to put anything up there, it's the thing I use or don't use, right? Or don't use the least. And
maybe not the heaviest thing, though.
Exactly. I actually came up with a way to get it up there, Jeff.
Does it involve pulleys?
It involves a come along and a ramp, right? I figured if I could pull it up a ramp, even if it had guardrails on the sides of it, it wouldn't be that bad. What do you think? You coming over to help me do that?
Yeah, let's do it. It's the reverse of how we used to get cast iron radiators down from second floor rooms. We would just set up a ramp and a come along and then just slowly winch it down.
That reminds me of those witch windows in Vermont that they claim were once used to, extricate coffins from, or at least bodies, maybe not coffins, but bodies out of windows. Moving things, right?
The only reason I would move that anvil up there is that someday Liam would have to deal with it, and that would be a...
Wait, that's a reason you would or wouldn't?
That's the reason I would.
I'm not sure you want to admit that.
Anywho, so our first feedback comes from Terry, who's a project manager with Dexter Builders. He says, "Hi, all. I just listened to 527 and had some thoughts. Your conversation about lighting reminded me of something I learned in school. I can't remember the specifics, but when LED lights came into homes, the expectation was that people would use less energy. But what has happened is people just install more lights. In the projects I run, this seems to be the case. The company I work for does renovation, and we never remove lights, just add more, usually many more. When we finish basements, it's common to install a dozen lights, 4, 6, or 8 in each room, it seems. We also install quite a few sun tunnels, and there are some bells and whistles available. There are nightlight options that include a small solar panel and rechargeable battery that turns on automatically at night to provide a soft glow. There are also light kits that can be installed inside and tied to a wall switch, so at night they double as a large LED. Something I learned about last year is that skylights can come outfitted with solar-powered shades. If the shades are installed by the manufacturer and not retrofitted, the whole unit qualifies for the same tax rebate that a solar panel would. I think it's 30%. This tax break is also available to certain windows with motorized shades between the glass if the shade is powered by a solar cell. Pella has an option like this. We've only installed one, but I haven't checked with a customer to see how it works in practice. But this is a large savings on some relatively expensive windows. The rebate doesn't quite cover the upcharge for the motorized shades, but it's a large part of it. I love the show. Look forward to it every Friday. Terry of Dexter Builders. So I think that's hilarious. So instead of saving money and energy, we're just putting more lights in and presumably just using more of them. Is that your experience too, Ian?
My experience is that we're putting copious amounts of light fixtures in homes, but I would question though about using more or less energy because the LED bulbs use a fraction of what old school bulbs did. So if it's even 20%, are you doing 5x the lighting to match your previous energy use? Probably not. Maybe you're doing double, but I think you're still to the good on energy used.
Yeah,
well, what about? Oh, go ahead, Jeff.
No, it's. I mean, the power equivalent is like 7 or 8 times.
Mm.
Yeah.
So you'd need 7 or 8 times as many LED lights just to equal what ordinary incandescent fixtures would require. Is that right, Jeff?
Yeah, energy consumption wise, yeah.
But if it is translating into the addition of more lights, that's more penetrations in the building envelope typically, right? Because are we talking can lights? So
yeah, oftentimes that's certainly it's can lights.
Yeah, that's certainly a possibility, Kylie. It's interesting. It's the same thing that happened when we started making our homes way more energy efficient in the 80s. Instead of like having smaller HVAC systems as was predicted, people just made the homes bigger. What about the sun tunnels? Do you guys put those in ever, Ian, in your projects?
We do. They end up being a really slick way to meet your daylight requirements for certain spaces.
I have to admit my ignorance. I did not know that term, sun tunnel. So I had to look them up. And can you explain to some other people who might not know the difference between a skylight and a sun tunnel?
So if you think about just a pipe, so you would have something like a 12-inch diameter tube going through your ceiling, and the inside of it has a lot of mirrors in it, and the top is kind of a dome shaped usually. So you have that dome sitting on top of your roof, and then it takes sun and then refracts it through the mirrors, and sometimes they can turn slight corners. You can have some bends in them, and they still shine a lot of light into an interior space. Like maybe you have a bathroom that doesn't have or isn't able to have a exterior window or a hallway. Closets are another spot where we stick them in frequently.
Been writing about houses for over a decade, and that is not something that comes up very regularly in my conversations. So how common are they?
I don't know if we have them in 25% of our projects. They are something that typically is value engineered out first because oftentimes they're not necessary. I think they make a lot of sense where they end up in certain spaces. And I want to say our cost to install one is maybe between $1,000 and $2,000, depending on the length of the tube and the size.
I think they've only come about in our lifetimes, Kylie. So, they haven't been around for 30 years, certainly for 20. But
given that cost, living in a place with a bathroom that does not have a window, which is a drag. I don't know. Psychologically, a bathroom without a window is a drag. And for $1,000 over the lifetime of a house or however long you're in it, that seems reasonable to me. That seems worth it.
Yeah, the first one I ever
me
saw
of that,
was
Kylie.
No, because it's because it's a disruption in the building envelope. Is that why
Yeah,
you're not in
exactly.
favor?
And like a
Yeah,
flashed, penetration is never going to be as reliable as roofing,
solid. Yeah, I
in
totally
the
get that.
field, right?
Yep. I
The
guess it
first one
depends
I
on.
ever saw was in my in-laws' house that my father-in-law built, maybe in the mid 80s, early 80s, and their interior bathroom had one, but I can't remember offhand if that was original to it or if he added that later as part of a remodel.
It smacks of a 70s invention.
In a
Am I-
way, yeah.
Because you're
think it
thinking
is.
of all those goofy round windows that were
Yeah,
in
there were
those
just so many
70s houses,
things.
right?
Yeah, people were doing some goofy stuff in the 70s.
What were you saying, Jeff?
I think there's probably a regional difference. Because my father-in-law has them out in California, and they're remarkable out there. Because when I was out there last time, it was like the first day, it's like I'm looking around for the light switch to turn off the light, and it's like,
Yeah,
Yeah,
and
that's cool.
in a cold place, I think the hit to your thermal
Yeah.
envelope is going to be significant.
yeah. And he's got a big workshop. It's like 30 by 50, and he's got 4 of them in there, and it would be dark during the day without that.
That's
Or
cool.
you'd have,
Yeah, that is cool.
Well, I learned from Doug, who you all know is a regular listener of the podcast, that he was the one who mentioned the term demolition by neglect to Brian Pontalillo, and was a lot of our conversation was related to that. He says, I mentioned the term demolition by neglect to Brian when he lived in Charleston. He had talked on the podcast about the difficulty historic preservation rules presented for building. Our daughter and her husband live about 20 miles inland from the peninsula. On one visit, we were driving toward downtown and passed some houses in very poor condition. Our son-in-law explained that the rules made it too expensive to renovate these houses, but they were not allowed to tear them down. So they were just left to collapse. It's not necessarily developers trying to get land, but just owners who have no economic choice. So I think Doug's point is like the rules require that you scrape and paint your house, which could cost tens of thousands of dollars if it's in acute disrepair. So folks just can't afford to do that. So they're left with a house that ends up being abandoned, which is tragic, right?
It is.
I don't think that's the intent of historic preservation rules, I got to say.
You see that. There's a house that's been on this road that I live on now that it's since for at least 40 years, it's just been sitting there. It's not in complete disrepair, but it's full of algae. And it always strikes me like, what is happening with this house? Clearly it's still owned, but nobody's taking care of it. It's just one of those things. It's just being left to its demise. It's sort of a sad affair. And it kind of makes you wonder what's happening and why.
During my time working for a real estate developer, I learned that a lot of those houses, Kylie, are stuck in probate. So they're being fought over by a group of relatives, and they end up just sitting there. And whoever survives or outlives the rest of the people trying to get the property end up with it.
Yeah, that's a little bit my impression of this place. Yeah, I can see that. Mm-hmm.
It is so far off our normal content area, but get a will, people, because like you make the decisions for your family members so much easier if they know your wishes, and the legal wrangling that can occur when folks disagree about this stuff. I don't think it's what you want. Help them by making decisions about this stuff.
You speak from experience, I understand.
Make sure you include provisions for a forklift to be rented to get your anvil down off the top shelf, so that your anvil does not become burdensome to the rest
Maybe
of
I'll
your
put some
family.
money in escrow, so he'll have a way to deal with that, right?
That's funny.
This comes from Mike. Just sharing this interesting info in case it hasn't already come to your attention. Perhaps you'd like to address this on your podcast and offer your thoughts. I'm an engineer living in Rhode Island who really enjoys your podcast, and it's much appreciated. Thanks, Mike. Ian, this seemed to pique your interest. Do you want to talk about the link of some research that Mike sent to the podcast?
Yeah, so he sent a graph and a link to a white paper from some University of Chicago economists talking about how unproductive the construction industry is, generally speaking, in relation to the rest of the economy and rest of the industries in our economy. And it's when you start to dig deep into these types of reports, I'm always looking for some kind of statistics about, units built, or are they talking about new construction residential? Are they talking about industrial construction, heavy highway? Like, what are they talking about? All of it together? I didn't really find anything in this particular white paper, but their graph shows something to the effect that the construction industry peaked in productivity. I don't have the graph in front of me, Patrick, but I think it was maybe sometime in the 80s or early 90s, if I remember right, was where the higher spike was.
Let me dig that out, and then I'll report back.
But
compared to other industries, the takeaway is that construction is embarrassingly lacking in its contribution per worker. Am I right in that summation?
Right, because the way they're defining productivity is output, total output per total input. So your total inputs would be mostly labor hours and materials, and they're trying to show that the value output is not as high per worker as it is in other sectors of North American industry. But when I did some more in-depth research, I found a paper from, I think it was like 1958, arguing the exact same points and saying the exact same things about construction industry productivity. So these papers aren't really anything new, despite what people may think when one pops up on their news feed.
So it looks to me like the peak was somewhere around 62 or 65.
Okay.
And if you think about the houses we were building in 1962 and 65 and think about the houses we build today, I think it's pretty easy to figure out why there's been a drop-off in productivity per worker, is because the houses are 3 times as big, and at least that is 3 times as complicated, right?
Right.
Sure. And if you think about industry-wide total statistics, and you just think about something as basic as a new kitchen, that new kitchen, if it's a remodeled kitchen, is going to have 10x the inputs of a new construction project kitchen. So I would wonder how they're valuing and how they're weighting different products built by the construction industry, since most of them are not standardized in the way that manufacturing outputs could be standardized.
What was your takeaway with this, Kylie?
Well, like I mentioned to you, there were so many terms in there that I was unfamiliar with, and it got, it was interesting to give thought to and try to understand what was being said. But I thought it was interesting what you said, Patrick, about the house size and complexity, because as I mentioned in the last show, there are a number of swaths of the suburban towns that I've been living in the last number of years where they are clearing huge lots on which to put one house that's usually very complicated. They often called McMansions. So not only are you talking about the complexity of the house, but the site work itself, like, that takes a lot of time. Clearing all that, beyond what seems necessary for a single house, just the logging and the flattening and the grading and just all in the name of like one enormous lawn. So the approach to building, the methodology almost seems like it would have an impact, from my little understanding of it. But
my understanding too is the federal government pushed on states and municipalities hard to increase housing during this period of time. And ever since, I think the permitting process and all of the backroom stuff, the backroom stuff that goes on to get projects approved has taken longer and gotten more complicated, which I think would certainly take a hit on the output at the end, right?
It seems like it's more common too. I mean, maybe I just wasn't paying attention when I was younger, but it seems like you do see houses that were new houses, new construction that seem to have been abandoned mid build, and then they just sit there with their piles of debris outside. Like it looks as if it's going to continue, but it kind of never does. So I think that's what they mean by that was one of the terms, like something about not completing projects or the finished work.
I think it was indicating it takes longer. Am I right? I think that was the
yeah.
Then you add to it worker specialization, where at that time period where you mentioned, Patrick, where the productivity's listed as a higher ratio, one group probably did everything. Foundation, framed it, hung the drywall, insulated it, all the way through to finish. And now you have what may have been done by the same 4 people is now being done by a team of 30 working at different points on the project. So that's got to skew those input numbers pretty heavily.
And if anyone is behind, it's going to affect the whole rest of the project, right? If there's a shortage of any one of the sub-trades, or there is a slowdown in the product by any one of them, it's going to slow the whole thing.
Right. You can't discount the labor shortage as impacting the productivity, of course. Direct correlation.
I'd love to hear more about this from our listeners, because it's something you're dealing with every day, and I would love to hear if you think things take longer than they used to, or if we're doing less in the building industry than we should be, or are doing as much as we can, or what can we do to improve productivity, or should we? I'd love to hear. John writes in with a very mainstream question, which delights me. We have heart pine floors that buckle with the humidity, and they recede in the late fall. Thanks to a plumbing leak and subsequent casualty loss, I have the funds to attempt to solve this annual problem forever. One contractor's solution is to tear up the existing floor, install a vapor barrier, and install new flooring, which is of approximately a 1,500 square feet area. Another solution I feel would be to put down a vapor barrier and install new flooring, or perhaps to use a foam insulation sprayed from the basement. Whole house air conditioning using the existing ducts and or state of the art dehumidification system would be used to lower humidity problems if we thought that was helpful. I'd be interested in your suggestions for upgrading our classic Victorian in a desirable seaside location here on Block Island. Any suggestions would be appreciated as we are about to embark on this upgrade in the next few weeks. Have any of you been to Block Island? Who wants? No? No? Jeff?
No.
Nope.
No, none of us have. So I guess I'm as good as anyone to say what it's like. It's a little resort island for part of Rhode Island. Have you been? No. Beautiful place by all accounts.
Setting,
yeah.
Southern New England, yeah.
Cool. Even in the summer, which has made it desirable for, summertime getaways for folks in other parts of New England and New York for generations, I'm sure. Beautiful place by all accounts. So what do we do with John's question here? What are we going to tell him about his flooring?
I think you've got to figure out the cause of it. Do you have excessive humidity coming from the fact that it is cooler there and you don't have to run your air conditioner to get the dehumidification? Does he have some, leaky stacked stone foundation under the house, which is allowing his basement to be damp? You can make
that was my first question: does it have a wet basement or crawl space?
Yeah.
And unfortunately, I've not heard back from John, but that is a primary suspect, right?
Yeah, I would think the problem's not the floor. The problem is somewhere else, right? If the floor is laid over old skip floor sheathing that just has a bunch of gaps in it and is letting all of that moisture from the basement up. So I would think you would want to mitigate as much of that as possible before you thought about doing anything with what sounds like it would be the original floor to that house.
So to mitigate the moisture, I'm sorry, Kylie, what were you going to say?
Oh, I'm just thinking about the age of the house. You said it's a Victorian style, so I'm wondering, were those typically built on rubble foundations?
Could have been, depending on the time period.
Yeah, they could be, for sure. Or real fancy cut stone, too, depending on the house.
True, right, for if it's ornate.
Somewhere Rhode Island contractor to the stars, Mike Gerton, is just like, you got it all wrong.
Because that gets complicated if that's the kind of, if you're talking Rebel foundation, but I'm not sure for that style house if that would be. But anyway.
So what are you thinking to stop moisture problems from this, what is likely a high humidity area under the floor we're talking about?
You asking me?
Anyone.
Ian, you're the builder. Start with you.
I think you have to do some kind of dehumidification, whether that's some standalone unit. The standalone units are something that I've seen installed in a lot of homes to mitigate these types of moisture issues caused by that type of a foundation. I think you got to throw your effort at that first before you get too far down the road of spending untold sums of money that may or may not do anything.
Wait a minute. Am I understanding you right that you're suggesting to throw mechanical action at it before you do any kind of vapor barrier sealing or encapsulating of what I'm assuming is a crawl space or a basement?
In this case, I would, because I don't know that you're going to succeed in getting enough of that moisture mitigated by trying to do some kind of vapor barrier. He's probably dealing with excessively high moisture levels in certain parts of the house or the house in its entirety.
Spray foam might be helpful, but it's expensive, and the environmental cost is, maybe higher than running a dehumidifier or I would want air conditioning just for my own comfort, even on Block Island, which is going to go a long way to helping reduce the humidity in the basement, I would guess. But I think you got to figure out how much moisture are we talking about. You got to do some monitoring and figure out,
For sure.
how much you need to reduce it so you can accurately guess how much moisture the flooring is going to take on.
What's the process for measuring? Are you talking like how do you? Can you explain how you would go about measuring that situation?
Yeah, so the instrument is a hygrometer. It measures relative humidity, and there are good ones. Most are not. Most are inaccurate. I would look to the Pretty Good House crew for guidance on, which hobo data logger or whatever hygrometer they're using presently. And I'm guessing your folks on GBA have that recommendations, right, Kylie?
Talking about it. Yes,
Yeah.
I have read articles along those lines. It's been a while since
I think Mike
visited.
Maines might even have his own suggestions, which I would trust implicitly.
Doug Horgan, too. He's a big hobo sensor user and data logger.
I thought you were going to say Doug Horgan is a big hobo.
He'd probably get a kick out of that.
I think, of things we could call him, I think that would be among the least objectionable.
I would look for some kind of standalone unit that you can put down in the basement that will record the moisture that is. I don't think it has to be a Bluetooth to your phone or connected to your computer, just a quality but simple humidity monitor.
How long would you collect data on something like that to get, like a week, a month?
I would at least do it for when this is a problem, and they know it going years back, right? When this floor starts to cup up, and start monitoring then, and then when it starts to settle down, you've got to the safe window. And when you get to the safe window, then the safe window to try and keep the floor at the rest of the year is my guess. Someone's going to tell me that there's a huge hole in my building science rationale here, but we'll see what happens. This is a common problem, right? I mean, have you been called back to houses, Ian, that have had cupping floors from construction moisture or weird situations that have arisen?
Not recently. When I was in Connecticut working for HVP, there was a few clients who I believe Mason had the Santa Fe dehumidifiers installed in their basements to take care of a lot of these problems, and that seemed to be a really simple, straightforward fix for these. But I think when you're thinking about a newly installed floor in a space, that's a totally different type of callback that you're going to get when the wood floor maybe wasn't given time to acclimate before it was put down. It's a totally different problem.
Hard one to fix, right?
Yeah.
This comes from Dane. Hey folks, we're under contract for this 1850s house outside of Boston. We are deciding what, if anything, to do on the house before we move our furniture in. Besides removing the textured ceilings, I'm thinking about AeroBarrier. I have no evidence of comfort issues, but given the house was built in 1854 and then expanded what looks like 4 times, I'm betting that it doesn't have a contiguous air barrier. Should I be concerned about messing up the drying potential of the house by using AeroBarrier? Would this trade comfort issues for rot issues? Has anybody studied the impact of AeroBarrier on old houses? What would you do if this was your house? Best, Dane. So did you all follow the Zillow link to see the house? It's beautiful, right? Does anyone want to, who can describe it?
It's difficult to describe, isn't it?
It's kind of a rambler, right?
Yeah, rambler. That's a good word for it. Yeah, there's a lot happening there architecturally. It's, I don't know what's the age of the house? Did he say?
1854.
1854. But
what do you think of this house, Jeff? It's beautiful, right?
Yeah.
Been added
and like he said, there's been multiple additions, so it's kind of lost whatever initial style it had.
Right. Yeah.
It still looks like it belongs in Boston. I think anyone would agree.
Yeah, but it's not a clear-cut example of anything
in particular. Yeah, right.
Can I guess this is like a lot of the houses you worked at HVP, Ian?
Yeah, very, very similar. And you know that from living in the Greenwich area, how many of these houses still exist in Western Connecticut.
You mean that have been added on to so many times and
Ramblers, started
uh-huh.
off as a small, couple room house, and then somebody had money, so they put the kitchen addition on the back, and then they added a bedroom when they had more kids, and just keeps growing.
But sometimes, and in the case of this house that they're looking at, the scale was not disproportionate to what was existing. Oftentimes, they'll bump up the size and the scale to make more room, and it really has a detrimental effect on the overall look of the house, I think.
Yeah, sometimes that little house that it starts out as can look like an entryway to the massive
garage or
gargantuan addition and garage that gets bolted onto it at some point.
Right. Patrick, you did a story on AeroBarrier. What are you?
Yeah, you're Mr. AeroBarrier.
Yeah. I think of you that way now.
Tell us what you think.
And they haven't even sent me a T-shirt. What the heck?
Total missed opportunity on their part.
I don't know what to say about blowing AeroBarrier into this house. It's got amazing built-ins and finished carpentry and stuff. Like, I worry that it's going to blow the ceiling all over that stuff. And, protecting it all seems like a huge job. I think
not only that, but what are those built-ins obscuring that AeroBarrier is unlikely to seal for you? I think he's got to start with a blower door test on it, right, Patrick? He's got to get you up there on a trip to Boston and slap the blower door on it and see where this thing's leaking.
Remind me next time I want to have you on the show, this conversation that threw me under the bus. No, I think you're totally right, Ian. Dane needs an auditor, a BPI certified, a ResNet certified person to tell them what should be done with this house, because we can't tell. We can't tell.
I don't think it would be a good idea to just go in there and smoke the thing with AeroBarrier and hope that does the work. You may end up doing that in the end, but I don't think you should go to that right off the bat.
It would be better, I think, if there are huge thermal bypasses, as we call big leaks, as opposed to little leaks that AeroBarrier is meant to seal. There is probably big air leaks that need to be addressed a different way. And a good energy audit will tell you what those areas are and hopefully offer suggestions on how to deal with them.
I read a piece on AeroBarrier. I think you may have provided the link, Patrick, in existing homes that Peter Yost wrote a while back when the product was pretty new. And it strikes me that in the article, the the contractor that he was interviewing, talking with, that uses it regularly, relies heavily on a painting crew company to prep the houses, the existing houses, some of which are occupied, not in between, homeowners, but occupied, and applying it in that kind of context. And he shared a lot of images of what it takes to prep. And like you said, like anything over, I think the article said anything over a 1/2 inch gap needs to be rough sealed. And in which case, sometimes that means like cut and cobbled, rigid foam surrounded by, there's just so, and I'm picturing this is a Victorian home, right? Think of all of the nooks and crannies and the size of the thing probably. And it just seems like, just another little side note. It just so happens that, Fernando Pages Ruiz is a contributor to both Fine Homebuilding and Green Building Advisor, was asking me about this product, I was surprised to learn that it was new to him. I would have thought it was something that he would have known about, but he pitched it as, he said, have you ever featured this in either publication? I said, we have a couple times. Anyway, as a result of that conversation, he reached out to Jay Crandall, who is a Virginia-based engineer and actually is speaking at this year's IBS show. And he's active in code development. And just this is a little side note, but I thought it was interesting to share. He said that issues I've heard in recent code proposal discussion for this technology, AeroBarrier, is that they're not using third-party testing providers as required for air leakage testing currently in the code. So it could just be semantics, but I think the underlying concern with the manufacturing or the manufacturer certifying their own product installation and performance instead of a third party, which is currently required for other technologies. It's just a little side note about how code is viewing this application. I hadn't heard anybody talk about that.
If folks are wondering, there's a pre-test AeroBarrier blower door test and a post-test AeroBarrier blower door test, and it's done by the installer. So Kylie's point, or I guess it was Fernando's point, is that some folks could be not on the level, right? They could be fudging the numbers to, document a certain airtightness level that may not be the actual, right?
That reflects well on them,
yeah.
Right? Yeah, that's what third-party verification is all about, right?
Yeah, make sure that folks are telling the truth who are doing the work. Any other thoughts on this house? How do we improve its efficiency? I think we gotta get someone to check it out, stem to stern.
Yeah.
It strikes me that houses of that era and, like the age of it and the complexity of it probably, and the basement situation, and what's the best fit there? Like that seems like when everybody always just goes to spray foam or flash and bat or something. It just feels like that's, of course, air sealing being the first step, but when you get into the insulation, that seems like where people go. Doesn't seem like
it's easy, Kylie, and you make a phone call, and if you're a builder or a homeowner, there's a lot to like about those kind of solutions.
Right, and like with a building like this, it's rigid foam on the exterior is just not going to be what you're going to do. Forget it.
They're
never be able
They're
to
never going to let you take the siding off of that house.
And why would you ever want to? Yeah.
Yeah, and I don't think that makes sense. On a beautiful home like this.
Right.
I don't think you could afford it. There's no way.
Right.
I think you have to tackle it with the goal in mind of you just want to make it as good as you can with what you're working with there without destroying the historical fabric of it.
Speaking of historical fabric, we're going to talk today about resources for training folks in trade work. Is that right, Kylie? Events and seminars and materials, right?
Well, maybe our wires got crossed a little bit, but my understanding was we were going to talk about specifically building science
training
offerings. Yeah. just because that seems like a sort of like a more narrowly focused niche of education that people are seeking. So yeah,
I'm going to pretend I was like all over that, and that was the segue talking about the building science of this home in Boston's area and the ongoing need for continuing ed for folks in the industry.
Jeff will take care of that in post-production.
I only wish Jeff could fix my many guffaws in post-production.
I know, me too. I lay awake thinking about what guffaws he could have fixed or maybe could fix.
Ross is revisiting a subject that we've covered in the past, but I find it interesting. He says, in the past year, I've heard permanent wood foundations being discussed on a few media channels, including the Unbuild It Show podcast, the BS and Beer Show podcast, Passive House Accelerator, and the Fine Homebuilding podcast. There's a lot of intrigue around this unique foundation. However, few people on the shows have had much experience with it. I'm starting an owner build this spring in Minnesota, Climate Zone 7. I'm considering doing a wood foundation along with a slabless slab, so I would also have a wood slab. I want to call those insulation slabs, people. Can we just start calling them that? Because I think it makes a lot more sense than a concrete-free slab or a slabless slab.
Yeah. Say it again how you want to phrase it.
Insulation slab.
Okay, yeah. Yeah, that's good.
I'm working on my legacy at this point in my career, Kylie, right?
I
so
support
this
you
is
all
what
the
I
way.
got.
I think that's a good one. I had come up with concrete-free slab, but I like yours better.
This is what, keeps me awake at night. I don't wish it upon any of you. This comes from Ross. I think there could be a few points of interest. First, the project would rely on some products including rock wool comfort board 80 for below grade insulation and Advantech subfloor for the slabless slab. And maybe there would be interest from them in doing a product sponsor or highlight. Second, my dad has some experience and lessons learned from building with a permanent wood foundation, like my example. My grandmother's house actually had some lateral load movement due to a lack of proper lateral bracing on the floor joists. And lastly, it's a fairly relevant topic with the struggles to source and increasing prices of concrete recently. There's been a lot of discussion on the topic. If you think it would be something of interest, I'd be happy to chat more. So do you guys think it's of interest? Is this something that, yeah? Okay.
I think Andrew's got to get in the car and drive up there.
Andrew?
Is that close to him?
Well, he's in Minnesota Zone 7, which means he's probably north of Andrew, but
close enough.
Close enough.
Yeah. Is a permanent wood foundation have any place in fine home building? I'm asking rhetorically.
I think so. I think he hit it on the head with concrete and how difficult it is to source right now, and that doesn't appear to be improving at least any time in the next year or two. So these types of out of the box or whatever off the wall foundations, I think are going to get more and more popular, especially with the owner builder crowd.
Especially with, people in the high performance building industry are looking for alternatives to getting away from concrete. So one way in which this topic was covered on the BS and Beer Show, I think it was Mike Gerton who was one of the guests. He's a big proponent of these foundations.
And he's actually done it. I shouldn't say his dad did. Decades it's been in service.
Yeah, he has a lot of good things to say about it. His presentation on that show, that episode is, if anybody's interested in it, was excellent. A lot of details as to, how to detail it so that it lasts for as many years as his dad's place has. So some people looking to decrease the carbon impact of their projects might look at this foundation as a potential system. That's one way to look at it.
Jeff, you are our arbiter of all things that make sense and practical. What do you think about this?
It's an intriguing idea. It's also kind of a scary idea, but I think there's enough out there that have been successful that if you do it right, it works. But I think you absolutely have to do it right.
Patrick, do you think it requires like a very, very specific skill set? Or do you think the contractor who puts his or her mind to figuring it out can do it? I mean, what's
Well,
the
what I
learning
think is
curve?
great about it, and maybe it's singular advantage in my mind, is that you're a framer or you can do it, right? It is building stud walls with pressure treated plywood instead of normal plywood, and you put a fat plate on a compacted gravel base. It's very simple in concept and execution. I would describe it.
How do you treat the rim joist, or I mean, there's probably different ways to do it, but that big air leak with your permanent wood foundation, what are the methods and projects used there?
I would argue it's easier than with concrete or masonry because of
the wicking.
it's a tape joint, which you're going to have a more difficult time doing on taping masonry to
wood.
framing lumber, right?
Right.
Or sheathing, getting
It's
it to stick to concrete is difficult.
like material.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. That doesn't get talked about very often. The argument to be made for using like materials because they are easier to transition and make better continuous seals.
The trade group for the Concrete Foundation Association is going to be writing angry letters to the podcast saying that,
Can we
not
write them
thinking about
angry
the
letters
long-term-
about where can we buy your product? Because no one will sell us your product right now, and that's part of what's causing interest in a foundation like this. I had our concrete guy that did the foundation for my house told me that over the next 2 to 5 years, so you're going to be better off doing grouted concrete block instead of trying to do poured concrete wall because of how difficult concrete has gotten to get a hold of reliably.
What? So you can't buy concrete because there's a shortage of Portland cement, or what?
No,
What's going on?
In our area anyway, there's been a major consolidation of the industry, and so much of it is going to large scale projects that if you're a concrete contractor or a new home builder, there's no reason for them to service you. All of their output is going to large pre-purchased projects that selling margins that fit their long-term company finances. The days of having a single ready-mix plant, at least around here in a small town that services contractors locally, are gone.
Oh,
Boy.
Please, on an up note.
That is totally news to me. I have not heard that.
Yeah,
And
I
is
hadn't
this
heard that either.
through
Yeah.
much of the Midwest, or just limited to your part of Wisconsin, Ian?
A lot of the contractors that both my boss Ben and I talked to through Remodeler's Advantage are all having the same issues with getting and sourcing concrete and concrete contractors.
I wonder if this has anything to do with the increase in infrastructure rebuilding.
I'm sure it does.
Building, bridges,
You
highways.
mean that it's being diverted to those projects?
Large projects, yeah.
Uh-huh. Huh.
I couldn't have imagined it would happen that quickly, though. I mean, that law was only passed, a year ago?
Very
Has it been that long?
Yeah, not even.
We have
I
a
don't
very
think.
large solar project going on, maybe 20 minutes north of my house, which I've been told by a few different people is taking the entire output of the largest local concrete plant for 4 months.
Wait,
And my
what?
guess
Say that
is it is so expensive to
it's
build a
taking all the
concrete batch
output.
plant that you can't increase capacity easily.
Correct.
Like you're
Yeah,
talking.
it's taking their entire capacity for 4
I see.
months.
Right. They can't do anything other than beyond that.
Yep.
Well, if any of you have any more on that, I would love to hear that too. If you're having concrete shortages, or if you're learning from your contractor friends that they are, I would love to learn about that.
And the
Oh my gosh, so-
shortage of the sand continues as a raw material
Oh,
shortage
yeah, that
for
I've heard about.
concrete.
Yeah. That's true, right? Yeah, that's the main ingredient, isn't it? Sand.
I feel like
Boy,
we
that's-
need a new sound effect, Jeff. Maybe you can help me out with that in post-production, because we have a new segment, and it's something I just came up with yesterday.
Brand new.
questions from the crew. So we're going to ask you all questions, and I hope you'll write in with your answers. And I think this
That's a
could
good
be,
idea.
Yeah, it could be quite fun. So I'll go first, and then you all can go, and then we'll fade out to our podcast after show for members of the Fine Homebuilding family. So my question is, what is a great day on the job for you? And this is part of the genesis of Pro Talk questions that we regularly ask, because one of the great things about doing trade work is you can love your job. And I'm guessing it's not all roses every day, but I'm sure there are moments when you just love it. So I would love to hear about that, because I have to live vicariously through your enjoyment on the job site.
Yeah.
How about you, Kylie? What do you want to know?
Well, I actually would like to know how many listeners would be willing to buy a house that was in need of an entire new wall system. Just curious. It seems like it's just such a obstacle to selling, and I'm learning the market for a house has got complications, and there's just a lot to consider. And so it's like, you think that the majority of people are just completely turned off as soon as they find out it needs a new well, it's like a game, forget it, not going to happen. I guess I'm just curious. Some people are intimidated by that. Are the
Can we make it more
majority of
general?
people?
Like, what do you do with it? Would you buy a house with a big flaw, right? Or a major flaw?
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's a good one. Mm-hmm.
Like a sand point well.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, it's an interesting time for the market, and watching it go up and down and all around, and what people care about and what people don't care about, and what they're willing to, sight unseen buy cash, and but yeah, major flaw. How does that factor in? And I know there's so many variables, but just thinking about it.
How about you, Ian? What do you got?
I would want to ask the DIYer segment specifically if the interest rates and general economic outlook are affecting the projects that they want to do to their homes. Are they holding off on remodeling their kitchens the same way that maybe somebody who would contact a company like the one I work at is doing, or maybe changing their strategy on how they're remodeling their homes?
One wall at a time.
How about you, Jeff?
Gosh, I haven't really thought about this one. It's like, for the builders, it's like, what's the most interesting project you've ever worked on?
Oh, that's a good one.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I hope we'll hear about all those things from y'all, and anything else that's on your mind or any questions you may have. But unfortunately, that's all the time we have for today. Thanks to Ian, Kylie, and Jeff for joining me, and thanks to all of you for listening. Please remember to send us your comments, questions, and suggestions to fhbpodcast@taunton.com. And please like, comment, or review us however you're listening. It helps other folks find the podcast. Those of you who are All Access members, please stay tuned for our podcast after show, when we're going to talk about resources for learning building science for yourself or your crew, and ways to bring more value to what you bring to the table, is how I would describe it, right? So I hope you'll stay tuned for that.
And remember to have somebody help you get that anvil off the top shelf of your tool storage.
It's going to be your legacy, Patrick.
I'm thinking getting it off's pretty easy, right?
All right, have somebody help you get it up there.
Just ask the coyote.
Well, it's been a pleasure hanging out with you all, both listeners and you all in the panel with me. So look forward to doing it again. And stay safe, everybody. Keep craft alive. Happy building. We'll see you at the after show.